Conservative Pierre Poilievre saying BC's toxic drug crisis response is making Vancouver hell on earth. BC's premier pushing back.
All of this work is with an aim to keep people alive so that they can get into treatment.
That didn't age well, did it? Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Facing pressure on literally all sides, Trudeau's Liberal government has officially rejected Toronto's application for decriminalizing illicit drug use that would have mirrored the legislation recently rescinded in British Columbia.
Let's take a look.
The federal government has now officially refused a request from Toronto Public Health to decriminalize personal possession of controlled drugs. This news came late today in a statement from the federal Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
But the issue of how best to deal with the drug crisis remains. And without decriminalization, the city is now seeking additional supports from the province. CTV's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Siobhan Morris has the details.
The flurry of letters began with a note to Toronto's top doctor, sent by Ontario's Minister of Health and Solicitor General.
And we don't want to have a failed experiment happen right here in our Toronto.
Taking a firm stand against Toronto's application to decriminalize possession of small quantities of drugs.
I will fight this tooth and nail.
Next, a missive from the Premier to the Prime Minister, demanding a review of safe supply sites and to require buy-in from provinces, like Justin Trudeau said mattered for decriminalization.
We need to work with all partners, including provinces, on any proposals.
Then the mayor's office got to typing.
I'm releasing a letter
asking other levels of government to collaborate to tackle the drug toxicity epidemic killing 500 Torontonians a year.
I think we need to look at the person rather than the substance itself.
The letter includes a list of things Toronto would like help with.
24/7 crisis beds in the city. Because right now our emergency are inundated with people who are suffering from addictions.
The letter also calls for teamwork on expanded access to treatment for all kinds of substance use, more supportive housing, wraparound social supports and referrals, and evaluation and monitoring to lead to permanent long-term funding. Moyes can't say what all of this might cost.
But I can say to you, doing nothing actually costs us more. It affects our hospitals, it affects our shelters, it affects all our programming.
Right down to clean up for parks.
A third of the people that are homeless, that are in our shelters, want drug treatment program.
Moyes pleads with the province to look at what's working when it comes to safe supply.
The programs we have in Toronto right now has saved thousands of lives. And without it, it would be a lot worse.
Siobhan Morris, CTV News.
So, hallelujah. That's all I have to say. But here's the scary thing. I think if this request would have been sent 6 months ago, it probably would have been granted.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the main reasons why it got rejected was because BC has now come back and said, we want you to recriminalize drugs. There was a mistake that was made, and we need this fixed now. Also, Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre have spoken out and written letters to the Liberal government to tell them that we do not want decriminalization in Toronto because it's going to mirror the same mess that was caused in BC.
Well, and the British Columbia NDP party is getting absolutely destroyed in the polls with a provincial election coming because the Conservatives have just... They've come on like a wave because people are sick of it. Like, here's the thing. These safe supply sites, whether they're in Toronto or BC, they would be worse because there would be a lot of other drugs in addition to, the stuff that's available at the safe supply. They are a hotbed for criminal activity. There's businesses all around these sites and parks and everything in BC that they are suffering business because of all of this criminal activity that's going on because people don't want to go in those areas anymore.
Well, and as we discussed in our video last week, which we'll put a link in the description, you cannot just decriminalize drugs and that's the end of it. If you want to follow the Portugal model, you have to decriminalize drugs, but also make it so that there are consequences for individuals who are caught using. And that can include anything from fines to counseling to medical treatment. It's not just, okay, you can do whatever you want, drugs are decriminalized now.
Yeah, there's still penalties. You just may not be thrown in jail. Now, let's get to the statement from the minister who actually put out this announcement. So this is from the Honorable Yara Sachs. The overdose crisis is one of the most serious and unprecedented public health threats in Canada's recent history. It is driven by the illegal drug supply, which is unpredictable, rapidly changing, and growing increasingly toxic. To address this crisis, we need a full continuum of supports across prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and enforcement while ensuring a careful balance between public health and public safety. Today, Minister Sachs has refused the request as proposed from Toronto Public Health to decriminalize personal possession of controlled drugs and substances for people in Toronto. She has determined that it does not adequately protect public health and maintain public safety. This includes concerns with feasibility and ability for law enforcement to implement the proposed model, protection of youth, and lack of support from key players, including the province of Ontario. This government remains committed to addressing substance use and addiction as a health issue. All partners must work together to make available an accessible health and social support so that we can divert people from the criminal justice system into the healthcare system. Our government will continue working in partnership with all provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous communities, and experts to determine the best ways to support the health and well-being of people who use substances and help reverse this toxic drug and overdose crisis. We remain committed to taking a public health approach to this crisis and keeping everyone in our community safe. Man, I hate these buzzwords, toxic drug overdose.
Oh, it drives me nuts. It doesn't really matter if the substance came
from Colombia or Toronto.
If it came from the streets or if it was prescribed to you by your doctor, there is potential for abuse, there is potential to overdose, and there is potential for danger. It doesn't matter whether it's quote unquote toxic or whether it's quote unquote non-toxic coming from the government.
Well, here's the thing. Like the opioid crisis came from medical professionals.
Absolutely it did.
Let's just be clear about that. And it came from medical professionals by way of Big Pharma giving kickbacks to doctors who would prescribe this stuff, and Big Pharma knowing good and well what the effects would be. Repeat customers in perpetuity. So, for these politicians to say, oh, well, it's a toxic drug crisis. This was started because of quote unquote non-toxic drugs. So I don't want to hear it anymore. Now, the other interesting thing is, if you recall, it was January of 2023 that BC introduced this. Let's go back in time and hear what they had to say.
The weather cold in Ottawa and the reception from one federal leader icy as well as BC's premier arrives for his first official visit. Conservative Pierre Poilievre saying BC's toxic drug crisis response is making Vancouver hell on earth. BC's premier pushing back.
All of this work is with an aim to keep people alive so that they can get into treatment, so that they can get the support that they need to hopefully turn their lives around.
Poilievre's criticism coming as BC has just one day on the books with personal use hard drugs decriminalized, something he says he'd nix if elected. Eby says this is a nonpartisan issue that needs an evidence-based response.
Our goal is to save lives, to get between the predatory drug dealers and people with serious addiction issues, and we want to get in between those two groups with nurses, with doctors. And so part of that is around our Safe Supply initiative.
And it all rolls into Eby's key goal in his first official meeting in Ottawa, increasing money for healthcare. Eby back in Ottawa next week with all Canada's premiers to hammer out details with the Prime Minister for next steps on federal healthcare funding.
That didn't age well, did it?
No, it didn't. Because I think we've learned, as I said, that it doesn't matter where these substances come from, whether it's from a dealer or whether it's from the pharmacy, they are still dangerous and still have the ability to get you addicted and the ability for you to overdose on them.
Well, and I can't even say the unparliamentary words because, YouTube would definitely not let us even post this video, but I have so much disdain for that man and his government, because what we now know is that all of those safe supply narcotics ended up in the hands of kids across the country, because the RCMP has the reports to show it. So what you've done is you've essentially condemned a whole bunch of kids to drug addiction because of your foolish policies.
Well, that's right. They're starting a whole new generation on this addiction.
And the issue is, well, you know, we need to keep these people alive longer so they get into treatment. They have to want to go into treatment.
But not only that, the treatment needs to be readily available.
Right, and it wasn't.
Well, and that's part of the problem, is that BC just decriminalized substance use, but didn't have the other supports in place that are necessary to make treatment a success. They didn't have the doctors, they didn't have the nurses, they didn't have the programs. They just decriminalized the drugs.
It was just open season. But the good news is because of all of the Canadians in British Columbia that rose up and have said, no, this is not going to go on any longer, that influenced the BC government to influence the Liberal government to decriminalize in BC. And then when they saw all of the opposition coming from Ontario, and the Premier and the doctors and everyone saying, whoa, no, that is not coming here, Ottawa had no choice but to deny that. So this is a really, really good sign, folks, that the tide is turning from this radical left ideology that has gripped Canada for the last 10 years, and we're finally getting some common sense back into this country.